Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire. I have a lot to share with you in today's video. First, I'm going to be talking about the new ink and cardstock collection from Concord 9th. While showing you that, I'm going to update you on my ink swatches and also show how I label my inks so I can see the color on the side of the ink pad. I'll also talk about my cardstock storage, and I'm going to demonstrate a bunch of cards using the new product line here from Concord 9th. I'm going to apologize now. I'm in Oklahoma for my mother-in-law's funeral, so the sound on this video isn't that great, but I wanted to be sure to share it with you as soon as I could. Okay, so Concord 9th has this new collection of ink pads, mini ink cubes, cardstock, and re-inkers. And it's a beautiful line, a little bit different than other things I've seen on the market, so I wanted to be able to share it with you today. As I'm doing that, I'll share those organization tips, and then we'll create some cards. So let's get started by looking at the new Concord 9th ink pads. These ink pads are a little different than what I normally use. These have an extra firm foam pad. I usually reach for inks with a firm felt pad, and I'll show you comparison in a moment. So these inks are a bit different, so we'll talk about that. Now the ink in these pads is the latest formulation that's vibrant and fast drying color. So the results are pretty much what you get when you stamp. So you don't have to wait for the color to kind of settle and absorb into the paper. Now there are ink cubes available in all of these colors. I don't have the cubes, I just have the full size, but keep that in mind if you prefer. And there are re-inkers available. Let's start by talking about the firm foam pad on this ink pad by doing a comparison with the ink pads I normally use. So on the left, I have my Concord 9th firm foam pad inks. On the right, the black ink pad, that is the traditional felt pad that you normally see me use in videos. Now I wanted to show you a close-up look at these, and also I'll press something on it so you can see the difference. So on the left, the Concord 9th is a very firm foam, kind of sponge-like. You know what it feels like is kind of like craft foam or the fun foam we played with as kids. And here I'll press something against it so you can kind of see the give that it has. So you will ink your stamp up a little bit different than normal when you use this, and I'll demonstrate that. Now here is the traditional felt pad that I normally like to use. It's very firm. It feels like a piece of fabric kind of stretched tight across it. So I just wanted to show you the look and the difference of those. Now I will say I like the size of this ink pad. It's a traditional ink pad size, so it goes nicely with the storage of my other inks. And I found that the color on the top of the package on the lid is very close to the actual color of the ink used. Now I'm going to talk more about the difference in these inks, but let's go ahead and do some stamping so you can see. This is a Concord 9th Kite string stamp set. I picked this image down here to demonstrate with because it has some solid area and some detail area. I'm using my Misty stamping tool to demonstrate, but you could use an acrylic block if you prefer. Now when you ink up this stamp, it's going to feel different because it's kind of spongy. So the ink pad will kind of grab a hold of the stamp so you can see how it doesn't really wiggle much there. It's a different feel. What I find is if you kind of tap lightly, and you'll be able to see if you have good coverage. And then you can stamp it onto your cardstock. If you have a solid image, you want to put a little more pressure into it. If you have a detailed image, you want to be light-handed when you press it. So what I do is I do light taps of the ink pad onto the stamp. And then I can look. I have something white behind my stamp so I can see that I have good coverage. And the nice thing is this ink stamps nice and smooth and solid right away, which I really like. Now in the past I had avoided foam ink pads because many years ago the foam ink pads that I tried were a lot softer foam, and so I struggled getting good results because I would over ink every time. But these have a firm ink pad or a firm foam pad, and I find that I'm able to ink better with these without having to change my habit too much. So that's one of the things I like about these inks, and back at Creativation I was really excited to try them and see that I could ink with them in a very similar way to how I normally ink with felt pads. You just want to do a little bit of a lighter touch when you ink it. Let's go ahead and create ink swatches for all the different colors, and I'll talk more about the ink and the ink pads as we go. So this is the free ink swatch download that I have over on my blog, and I'll link to it below. You can download this and print it onto white cardstock, And then you can cut and trim them all down, and you end up with 2" by 2" swatches that you can add into a coin protector page, which I'll show you in a little bit. Now these are really easy to do. All you need to do is grab either a straight edge and a craft knife or a trimmer such as the Fiskars trimmer, which I'll demonstrate with here. Now along the left side of that cardstock, which is now at the top of the screen there, you can see little X's. It's kind of hard, I have it off screen a little bit here. But you start at the X and then you cut all the way to the edge of the cardstock there at the bottom. There are little tick marks so that you can connect those to make sure you're cutting straight. So I'm cutting this way first, and then we'll rotate the paper and cut it vertically also. This will result in all of these little swatches being 2 by 2. You can stamp onto these little swatches, or you could cut or punch little shapes of cardstock and glue those onto the swatches. So you can make cardstock swatches from this too if you would like to. Okay, so now we're doing the vertical cutting. I cut from the top all the way to the bottom, and you can see my little 2" by 2" pieces starting here. For this download, there are 2 pages because there are 24 cardstocks in this collection and 22 inks. So you'll just need to download them, print them, and you can create your own. Okay, let's create some ink swatches. Now, when I do this, I like to use an image from the company whose ink I'm doing. So I have a Concord 9th flower here, and I like to pick an image that has some solid area to it, but also a bit of detail. So I thought this flower was perfect. Now you'll notice that I'm just kind of tapping lightly and looking at the stamp. You'll be able to see if you have good coverage with this particular ink. And then when you stamp it, you'll see you get solid results, and that's pretty much how it will dry. It doesn't soften a whole lot, and so you can see your results right away. Now, one of the things I really found that I liked about this ink is that it doesn't stain your stamp a whole lot. There might be a tiny bit of staining, but the nice thing is if you wipe it clean, you can easily go on to another ink without any of the first color transferring to it. So you don't have to worry about switching between colors too much. So that was a huge plus for this ink for me. So I'm just demonstrating a few of the different colors here. I'm going to show you them all in a moment, but you can see how you get nice solid results. I also wanted to talk about the white cardstock that I'm using here. If you've watched my videos before, I have mentioned that the success of an ink not only depends on the ink formulation itself, but also the cardstock that you're using. Now, I normally use a Neenah white cardstock. It just happens to be my favorite. And this ink does work wonderfully on it. But I found it works even better on the Concord 9th white cardstock because their white cardstock is super smooth, and they made sure they picked a cardstock that worked great with their ink. So if you are going to try these inks, I recommend also trying their white cardstock. It's just a beautiful combination. If you have other white cardstocks that are super smooth, you can try that with this ink also. So as you see me ink these, you can see how I'm kind of slow to ink them, a little bit different than how I normally work, but it works with this ink pad. You kind of feel that it inks up differently. So it's not a hard change because of the firmness of this pad. Also, if you use an acrylic block instead of a stamping tool for stamping, this ink is a great one. Because if you use an acrylic block, you can put your ink pad on your surface and dab your stamp onto it. And I find you can get really good results with this particular ink because of the pad. So if you are an acrylic block user, this is a great ink also. Okay, I completed all of my ink swatches, and I wanted to show you the different colors in this collection. Now, I put all my little swatches into these coin protector pages, and I will link to those below. That's what I do for all of my inks. Now, in my ink swatch download, I did include white and black. There are no white or black inks, but there are white and black cardstocks in this collection. And if you wanted to make cardstock swatches with this, you just cut a piece of the cardstock and glue it right onto the swatch. I wanted to include the white and black. So there are 24 pieces of colors of cardstock, but 22 colors of ink. So let's take a closer look at the 22 colors of ink. There are several like trios in it, so you can see that trio right across the top of pinks. You can also see here the solid results that you get. And one of the things that I really like about this collection is its custom color collection that was really well thought out. Concord 9th is very good with color, and I'm very drawn to these type of colors. So they put a lot of thought and development in getting it just right. And as you'll see later, the cardstocks are a perfect match. In addition to a few of the trio combinations that they do have some other colors that are just there to kind of complete things, such as the dark purple, the navy, and the neutrals. So I will be demonstrating a lot of these in this video today, but I wanted you to take a look at the different colors stamped out and all in comparison. Now I know folks are going to ask about my favorite colors in here. I really like the brightness of honeysuckle. The sorbet color is such a unique one. I don't have an ink that color. It goes great with that grapefruit and poppy. Now the buttercup yellow there on the left is such a beautiful true yellow. And then the combination of greens here, the sprout, parsley, and evergreen. Now I also really like the neutral colors that they have. The wheat, mushroom, and dove are such beautiful grays and browns. The grays are true grays. So I like that they included these neutrals in this beginning collection, and I hope that they are going to add more in the future. Okay, let's next talk about labeling ink pads, the side of ink pads. Now, a few people have emailed me asking how I just recently labeled all of my inks. You may have seen that I have a color swatch on the side of my ink pad. I'm going to show you how I do that. But first I wanted to mention that Concord 9th has labels available for their new inks. You can either buy them, or I think if you buy the whole collection of inks, you get these labels with them. Now, I don't have these labels, so I created my own like I do on all of my ink pads, and I wanted to demonstrate that to you. So this is what it looks like. It's a true stamped color on the side, so I know exactly the color that it'll stamp when I quickly look at the ink pads. So to do this, I just cut a piece of whatever my favorite white cardstock is with that particular ink, and I cut a thin strip of it. So it's a little less than 1/4 of an inch. It doesn't really matter how long. You can make this custom to whatever you want. Now what I like to do is pick a solid image from whatever you have. I noticed that this Concord 9th stamp set that I had out had this candy cane that was solid. So that worked perfect. If you have a stripe image, that works also. I do prefer to stamp my swatches as opposed to dragging the ink pad on it. When you stamp your swatch, you get a true result. If you drag your ink pad or do direct to paper, it usually ends up a little bit darker than the true stamped color. So I always stamp my swatches. Now notice how well that ink cleans off. It just cleans off beautifully. Okay, now I'm going to trim this down. I want my swatch to be as big as possible so I can see as much of the color as possible. And I'll just temporarily adhere that to the side. I do like to cover these swatches with a label. Otherwise, this cardstock will get destroyed here over time. So let me show you how I do the label. This is the label maker that I recommend, and I'll link to it below. Let me show you how I set it up to make it a nice label for the side of my ink pads. I go up here and I press the font button. So there's that green button at the top. I'm going to press font, and you'll see a menu come up. Now using the up and down arrow, you can scroll through the menu, and you want to go to size. So size is the second one there. Right now it says auto. That'll make a label with too big of letters. So I'm going to use the side arrow button so that I can move through it to all the different sizes. I find that the 12 is the size that you want to create an ink label. So I set it to 12 and I hit OK. Now when I make my label, I want some extra space at the beginning and end. I found the easiest way is to add extra spaces in. So to start, I hit the space button 15 times. That just puts some extra space before it. And then I type in Concord 9th and the color of the ink. I do C and 9, and here I did peacock. Then I'm going to hit the space button another 15 times after it. Then you hit print twice. This will print the label for you, and it'll be a nice size to wrap around the side of your ink pad. It'll say OK to feed, you click OK, and there you have your label. So now I'm going to put this label over my ink swatch on the side. Again, I like to protect that ink swatch. I use my inks like crazy. I'm a little rough with them, and that ink swatch that I glued to the side there would tear and kind of wear over time. This way it's protected by putting this label on top, and I have the color name. Now I will link below to the two different types of labels that I use for this. One prints white on clear and one prints black on clear. So if I have a dark ink like this one, I use the printing in white. So now you'll notice the label is a little bit too tall. I could have trimmed the width of it before putting it on, but instead I just put it on and I use a craft knife to just kind of swipe off the extra that hangs off the edge. So now I have the perfect label for the side of my ink pad. Now here are a few of the examples that I've done. You can see if the ink is a light color, I print with black. If it's a dark color, I print the text in white. So again, there are two different labels and they both work with the machine, and I'll link to the ones I use below. I found an inexpensive version of the labels, and that's what I use for all of my swatching. So this has worked really well for me, and it's the best thing I've done to help me really see the true stamped color of an ink when I grab my ink pads. Okay, now that I've talked a lot about inks, let's talk about the cardstocks. These cardstocks are a little bit different than the cardstocks I normally use, and I wanted to mention that. There are 24 colors in this collection. Remember, there's white and black cardstock. In the inks, there's no white or black. But the colors of the ink match the cardstocks beautifully. These cardstocks are wonderful. They were milled in the US and Europe. There's some custom colors in there. So there are some unique colors that I didn't already have in my collection. Now, another thing that makes these cardstocks different than what I normally use is these are a lighter weight cardstock. They are 80 pound. Now, it doesn't feel flimsy at all, but I normally use 110 pound. You've heard me talk about that a lot in videos. And I will have to say I've been proven wrong after playing with these cardstocks, and I'll demonstrate that today. These 80 pound cardstocks die cut beautifully. I never have problems with not getting a complete cut, and they're nice and smooth, and the color assortment is incredible. Now, I put my cardstocks into job ticket holders. That's what those sleeves are. I just cut a little bit off the top of the job ticket holder, and then I put a label on the top corner. By the way, that one there that's not labeled is mushroom. Now, these job ticket holders, I've been doing this for my cardstock storage for a long time. I will link here and below to my paper organization video. It's the exact same thing I've always done, so I didn't want to bore you by going through it again. But I go into detail about the sleeves I use, how I keep the scraps in there, and then how I store these in my room. So be sure to check that out if you're interested. Now, I mentioned this is an 80 pound cardstock. It is still a high GSM, which means it's not a flimsy cardstock. It's still thick enough to use. Now, I will say that if you have a lot on the front of your card and you use one of these cardstocks as a base, I do recommend putting an insert on the inside so the card is stronger. So what I do is I cut a piece of white cardstock and just glue it right in there. This gives the note card base some stability, makes it stronger, and you have a nice place to write your personal message. This is great when you use a dark cardstock too. So I can use all of these cardstocks for bases also. So I am all about more color in my craft room, so the more colors of cardstock and inks I can find, the better. And there are some new colors in this collection, new and different than what I have, so I'm really excited. Now, to get a closer look at the different colors of cardstock, I thought it would be fun to actually use them. I'm going to make a bunch of die-cut flowers, and then we'll turn them into cards later. The die-cut flowers and leaves that I'm using today are from the 3 new Concord 9th Fresh Cut Floral die sets. This is Fresh Cut Floral 1, and I will demonstrate how to make each of the flowers. This is Fresh Cut Florals 2. Forgive me, I could not find the stem and leaf die in my mess of a desk to show you here, but there you can see what it looks like. So I didn't use the leaf and stem today, but it does come with it. And then here we have Fresh Cut Floral 3. Now, what I did is I spent some time with my daughter die cutting all of these from all of the different colors of Concord 9th cardstock. I didn't use the neutrals, I just used the basic colors to create a ton of flowers. I also wanted some smaller die cuts to throw into our little flower bouquets we create. So I used these smaller dies from the Concord 9th Kindness Blooms die set, which happens to coordinate with this Kindness Blooms stamp set. I just wanted to show you that, and I do have a video using that. I also used these small dies from the Concord 9th Sweater Weather die set, which coordinates with this stamp set. So I encourage you to look through your die sets or coordinating die sets. Oftentimes there's little dies that are great to go with other die sets you have. So check this out. Here are all my die cut flowers with a ping pong ball. I'm not sure why that's in there, but I have them in my Organize More tray here, and look at all of these beautiful colors. So I had a die cut marathon, and now I can assemble a ton of flowers, more flowers than I used in today's video. So I have a lot to create later too. I also used the greens to create leaves and the yellows to create the center to my flowers. So now that I have all of these die cuts ready, let's assemble some flowers. I decided to start with my favorite of the fresh cut floral die sets, and that's number 2, that creates this daisy. So I die cut 3 of the daisy, and I'm gluing them together offset, and look at this beautiful quick flower that you get. I like that this cardstock isn't too thick, so you don't have too much bulk if you don't want it. But what I ended up doing is adding dimension to it and kind of fluffing up the leaves a bit, because I personally like the dimension. Now, I plan to hand deliver these cards, but if you wanted this dimension to hold up through the mail, you could put a little bit of dimensional tape behind some of the petals. Now, I die cut lots of these from the different colors of cardstock. So here is a demonstration of all the colors in their cardstock collection. I did leave out the dove, mushroom, wheat, white, and black, which I showed you earlier, and I'll show you again. But look at these glorious colors. They have an eye for color over at Concord 9th, so I'm really excited about this. Now, the most important thing is, how do these cardstocks match up with the inks? I find it to be such a glorious thing if you get a line of cardstock that matches the line of inks perfectly. It just helps in creating cards quickly that have a nice cohesive feel. So I thought I would do a comparison of each of the colors of cardstock with the matching ink. And you can see all of these colors are a fantastic match. Now, while I show you all of these matches, I wanted to give you a little more information. As I mentioned, these inks do come in cubes, which I find it to be important to me when I find an ink line that I like, because I know a lot of people like to save money by getting the ink cubes. So those are available, and this is a firm foam ink pad. I haven't used these inks enough to figure out how much re-inking it'll need, but there are re-inkers available, which is a very good thing. And Concord 9th has many different bundles available, or you can buy any of the things individual. But if you are one of those, I need them all, there are several different bundle options, and I'll share those below. Here you can see a color matchup with the different cardstocks, dove, mushroom, and wheat. Okay, so now we have all of these flowers. Oh my goodness, those are beautiful. Let's go ahead and make some cards. And I tried to use the inks along with the cardstocks on my samples. So let's start with this one here, where I used the 3 pinks together. Now on this, I used the Concord 9th Simply Said stamp set, which I've used before in videos, and it gets a lot of love from me. And I also used the coordinating die set with it. I really like that they have dies to cut out those script sentiments, so you can add them onto your card very easily. Instead of just stamping on a couple die cuts for the cards I'm making right now, I'm going to make a bunch of die cuts stamped so that I have them ready for when I make cards later. I have the negative space in my stamping tool, and I have a bunch of white die cuts ready. I'm putting one of each white die cut in, lining up the stamp with it, and then stamping it. Once I'm done, I can remove those die cuts, put in new ones, and stamp those. So I have a bunch of these ready for when I make a bunch of cards later on. I did die cut some extra white thank you die cuts that I'll glue behind my stamped one, so it has some added dimension and stands up even more on this card. Since I have dimension on the flowers, I wanted dimension on my sentiment. I also wanted to stamp some stripes in the background. Now I'm going to do something here that might be painful for some of you, but I promise it doesn't hurt. I found this stripe stamp set from Concord 9th, and I actually cut one of the stripes off. Now I know that's bold, but I couldn't find my other stripe stamp set, so I just did this. I can always put this stamp back together on my acrylic block or in my MISTI to stamp the stripes all at once. I promise it still will work fine, and now I have an individual stripe. So now I'm putting it into my MISTI stamping tool, and I'm putting it at an angle in the background. I have a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card here, and I'm going to stamp 3 stripes in the 3 different colors I'm featuring on this card. So this is cranberry, and I'll do honeysuckle and ballet slippers. So I'm just going to move this down on my MISTI. I didn't measure it out. Instead, I just slid it down and I looked to see when I was happy with where the next stripe will go. So I just thought it'd be fun to have 3 diagonal stripes right in the background. I've never done a card like this with the stamp stripes in the background and adding things on it, but I really ended up liking it, and so I'll be using this design for the other colors in this collection when I make cards later on. So now I'm using some strong liquid adhesive on the back of my flowers. That allows me to move them around, but then once it dries, it'll be there for good and I don't have to worry about them coming off. Now I can go ahead and glue my thank you right in there, and I like that I can kind of tuck it into the flower. I also die cut a bunch of green leaves that you can see there, and I kind of tore leaves off so I could have individual leaves, different size clusters of leaves. That worked really perfect. And because I only put adhesive on the back center of the flower, I could easily tuck these underneath to make a little arrangement. You can see I also used the Sprout cardstock to make some smaller die cuts from the dies I showed you earlier. And to finish off the card, I added some Lucy's Cards Papaya Pearls here and there, using my jewel picker to pick them up and put them in the placement that I like. So here's a look at the completed card. Lots of dimension on this, which I'm crazy about. Again, you could definitely make this a flatter card with less dimension by just not using any foam tape and just gluing them flat onto the card. You may notice some lines down the center of my green leaves there. I just used the tip of my bone folder to press a line in, and I just thought that added a little bit of detail. So this card features the pinks and reds, and I did a similar one here featuring some of the blues. We have Aqua Sky, Oceanside, and Peacock, and you can see how those go together very nicely. The leaf cardstocks I used here are Parsley and Evergreen. Now the little hearts in the background, I got those hearts from that Kite stamp set that I showed you earlier, and I stamped the hearts in the matching ink to the cardstock. You can see how it's an excellent match there. I put a little white pearl in the center of each of the little daisies, and then I stamped So Glad We're Friends onto a white die cut banner and just added it right across the daisies. I think this was my favorite of the designs, and I might make more of these with some stripes in the background too. This sentiment is from the Concord 9th Wildflower Field stamp set. There are 4 sentiments in here that I really like very much. Grateful for all you do, we miss you so much, so glad we're friends, and keep being amazing. I've used them a lot in videos and I'll use them today again. And I stamped that on a banner die cut, and this die is from the Concord 9th Simply Said die set that I showed you earlier in this video. It's one of the extra dies that is included in the coordinating die set. Okay, my next card is a Slimline card, so it's one of the long and narrow cards. And on this, I'll be using the Fresh Cut Florals 3 die set. So I used the petal die to cut twice from cardstock, and I get the pieces that you see here. So I am using a bone folder to kind of curl the petals on this. You totally do not have to do this, but I wanted to show you how easy it is to do. So I just do 2 of the die cuts together of the same size, and look at that flower that you get. So there are all these different sizes, so you can create different size flowers. You can layer them all together. You can layer some of them together, get a bunch of different sizes, totally up to you. I like that there's a lot of versatility to this. Now I'm just going to make one big layered flower, so I have all these individual ones that I'm going to glue together. You can do them so the petals curl up or they curl down, totally up to you. I made 3 flowers using that die set from Grapefruit, Sorbet, and Poppy. That's another trio in their collection. And I'm gluing them directly onto a note card here that I made that is 4 inches by 8.5 inches. Slimline cards can vary in size, and this is just one that I find easy to make from an 8.5 by 11 piece of cardstock. I stamped a sentiment on a banner die cut, and I glued an extra banner die cut behind it so it was stronger. I put some liquid adhesive on the back of that, and now I'll put something on it while it dries, so I can be sure that it attaches to those flowers at the center. Now I'm stamping some little hearts from that Kite stamp set with the matching inks to the cardstocks that we used, and you can see the beautiful stamping that we get using these inks in an acrylic block. You just dab it lightly onto the ink pad a few times, and it gives great coverage. I also added some leaves to our little arrangement here. You can see over on the side, sticking out the edges there, I did layer the sprout leaf with parsley leaf, a little offset, just for a fun layered look. And I also added some pearls to the center of the flowers. I really like this trio of colors, such a beautiful kind of coral peach color that is a favorite of mine along with aqua colors, so those two go together nicely. I did make those leaves hang off the edge of our cards, but because my card is only 8.5 inches wide, the envelope is wider than that, so it'll still fit in the envelope even though those are hanging off the edge, and I'll link to the Slimline envelopes that I use down in my description below. Okay, my next card features the yellow and oranges in the Concord 9th collection. Now for that big orange flower, I used the Fresh Cut Florals 1 die. I die cut these floral dies twice from the Marmalade cardstock, and again I'm using my bone folder to give them a little bit of a curl. Now there are many ways you can arrange these die cuts. You can actually arrange them to be a rose with the petals kind of coming up in the center. But I'm just going to do a basic flower here. So I glue the two halves together, and then you can glue them so that the petals curl up or curl down. I'm going to glue them so they curl down a bit. Now this flower was made from the Marmalade cardstock, and I also made a daisy from the Buttercup cardstock, and then in the center I used the Stardust. I also used parsley and evergreen to create the leaves to go with it. You can see I have a lot of dimension to this card because I used some foam tape and also some pearls, but you could glue these down flat if you wanted. That Ever So Grateful sentiment is from the new Concord 9th Hey Besties stamp set. Really like the unique sentiments in here. And there is a coordinating die set for this that cuts out those hexagon shapes and also does a small high sentiment, which I think is really fun because you could add that onto your card anywhere you want. It's just something that you can add quick and pop in. Now my next card uses the other colored cardstocks from the collection. So we have Stardust at the top, then Eggplant, Clover towards the bottom left. On the bottom we have Sea Glass, and on the right we have Midnight. So the Sea Glass and the Clover on the bottom, they go together wonderfully, but I thought these 5 colors made a unique color combination all together on one card. So I glued all the flowers squished together in the middle, and then I tucked some leaves underneath that I cut from parsley and sprout. And then the centers of the flowers and the extra little flowers are Buttercup. In the center, I die cut a hexagon and stamped You Are One of My Favorites from the Hey Besties stamp set and die set that I just showed you. Now this card demonstrates something that I think that's important to mention. The color collection from Concord 9th, I mentioned they're really good at colors. Well, they chose colors that work well together. So here are even 5 random colors from the collection create a really unique combination that still works. So that's one of the advantages of getting a collection of cardstock and a collection of inks is that you can mix and match them wonderfully. Now I do have a bonus card that I'm just going to show you very briefly because this video is long enough as is, but I did use a turnabout stamp in the background with different colors of Concord 9th ink. This is the new Concord 9th Positive Turnabout stamp. If you've never used a turnabout stamp, I highly recommend checking them out. I'm not going to do the stamping here because it takes a little time in this long video, so I will link here in the top corner and in my description below to how to use a turnabout stamp set. And I encourage you to check that out if you haven't. On that background, I used that stamp with 3 different colors of ink. I stamped the ballet slippers twice, that's the pink ink. Then I did Sprout for one of the turns and Buttercup for one of the turns. That turnabout stamp is one where you stamp it, then you turn it and stamp it again to get different colors. So I created that background and then added the flower to the center along with a You're Amazing sentiment from the Simply Said stamp set. So that's just a bonus card that I wanted to show you. I think it also demonstrates that you can mix and match different colors in their collection together very easily and get great combinations. Here I did the ballet slippers, Buttercup, and Sprout. And then some of those leaves are in parsley. All right, there you have a in-depth look at the new Concord 9th color collection. I also shared how to label my inks and how I store cardstock. I hope this information was helpful for you. I do have all the products that I use linked below in my YouTube description, along with links to the videos I mentioned. A couple of those videos are also here in the center, so you can watch them easily if that's helpful. Thanks so much for watching this. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and take care.